The Silly Goose Gang Podcast.
So we are back, episode 61 of the Silly Goose Gang podcast, heading on to the 1 year anniversary. We're delighted to be joined today, this evening, our time in the afternoon over in the States, by Kaedrich Olsen. So Kaedrich, thank you very much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you for having me here. This is great. I'm really excited to get into this with you guys.
We'll get into your Scottish adventures a little later on, but usually when we speak to any of our guests, either me or Ali has some experience in the field that the guest is in, but with you, we are both inexperienced. So we're delighted to speak to you. So and genuinely super excited. So what is your background, I suppose, first?
Sure. I've got probably one of the strangest lives, I think. The more I talk about it, the more I talk with people, the more I realize, wow, that was rather unusual growing up, I went to a spiritualist church, so seeing trance mediumship, or what we call channeling nowadays, was a common occurrence for me. Seance every Saturday night. I was used to sitting in a circle with people, talking to the dead. My parents, unlike many other people who are exploring pagan paths, were very open to me exploring paganism and trying to figure out what sort of a spiritual path worked for me. They let me get the books that I wanted to get. My mom would bring home after work any of the herbs or incenses or oils or any of, the wacky magical stuff. She even introduced me to some people. It was really great. And, as I explored the material, the works, I found that the Norse path is the one that worked the best for me. I studied various different esoteric traditions. I looked into different paths and what the processes were. But for some reason, the Norse one and runes really just clicked with me. And so when I was probably 13 years or so ago, 13 years old or so, I found my first set of runes. I was listening to some pretty crazy music coming out of the UK, a band called Sabbat. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I was really into games designer workshop games,
Yep.
And they were really promoting some of the stuff from Sabbat. And I was reading a book called The Way of Weird by Brian Bates, about a Christian cleric that came into Anglo-Saxon England back when it was still pagan. And it's somewhat of a true story, somewhat fictionalized. And all of these pieces just fell into place at once. And I said, all right, let's explore this path of runes. Let's explore this Norse path. And I delved in with both feet. That was my field of study for many years, reading Old Norse, studying Old Norse, translating it for myself, trying to figure out as much of the Old Norse culture, which, by the way, is separate from Viking, Old Norse culture, as much as I could to really understand what the runes meant to them, what their mysticism was all about, how it applied to their world. But that wasn't good enough, because if I could understand what it meant to them, how could we use it today? So I really spent quite a bit of time taking what worked for them in the Old Norse time, what their mindset was, and thought about how do we apply it today. And I did a bunch of tests and had test groups and all these kind of things, and came up with this formulaic process of, here's the Norse process. And here's where it started to diverge. I realized there was a gap in the pagan community, that there is a lot of feminine groups out there, a lot of women's groups. There's a lot of women, sacred feminine spirituality. But when it comes to men, it's either put on the back burner, poo-pooed, or chastised. And so there weren't a lot of resources for men. And I said, okay, I can be there for the men. And I started to hone some of my Norse stuff into paganism for men to help pagan men grow. At the same time, I'm reaching out to friends that I have that are in the paranormal world, and I'm thoroughly confused. I'm doing seances with them. I'm talking with paranormal investigators, and what I thought was normal, natural part of the world for me, they're lost and struggling with. And I'm like, oh, do you guys need some training in this stuff? And they asked for it. So I put it together. So now I teach classes on seances, help people with paranormal protection. I actually even train ghost hunters to be able to go into locations so that they can protect themselves. And I'm looking back at my whole life going, wow, okay. I don't know how I kind of got wrapped up into this one, but I say in my bio, I've lived a paranormal life. It's true. For me, the paranormal is perfectly normal. And this whole Norse mysticism is just a tool that I weave into the paranormal. I weave into shadow work when I help people dealing with shadows, and I weave it into pagan men's spirituality. So, yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell.
That's quite an intro.
Thank you.
um, yeah, there's so many interesting little points in there. I don't even know where you start with all that. So what was the so what like is your where were your parents? Are they Scandinavian, or are they from that part of the world? Was there any connection there?
A little bit. I mean, on my mom's side, she said that her ancestry goes back to like some of the first boats that colonized in the US.
Mm,
On my dad's side, though, he was second generation from Germany.
okay.
And my mom did a lot of genealogical research, and there's definitely, some Welsh in there. There's Danish, some Scandinavian, definitely some German in there. So it's a lot of Northern European that just by happenstance
Yeah,
tends
no,
to be
I
what
was
it
just
is.
trying to figure out if there was a reason why you were, the Norse thing clicked with you. Just if there was anything in the background, that there was any, a crazy aunt that said do this or do that. Just wonder if there's anything like that. But no, isn't that amazing how people are just drawn or find something and just go, oh, this is my thing. I like it. It's
Yep,
really
exactly what
a,
happened.
yeah, it's a really interesting thing. And
It's very powerful as well when you feel that, whatever it is, when you realize like this is my, calling, whatever phrase you want to put alongside it. When you find that thing that just fits, it's very, very powerful. And I think a lot of people don't always recognize it when it comes into their lives, something that you think it's maybe 4, 5, 10, 15 years later, and you think, actually, I chased because you could have very easily, I would imagine, Kaedrich, possibly not with your intro, but I'm sure there was other people that were interested in those esoteric things that by the time they got to high school were told, no, now you need to do the standard maths,
mm,
English, get your 3.5 GPA, go to university, graduate, go into law or finance, work for 50 hours a week until the age of 30, and then start a family, and you follow that path. Whereas you clearly didn't, and I would imagine clearly happier for that.
Oh, absolutely. And I definitely did some university and definitely do the 9 to 5 and all that one. And you're absolutely right. That knocking, that calling approaches everybody. And sometimes we don't listen to that one. We just kind of go along with our life because it makes more sense. We grow up in certain communities that tell us, no, don't do this. That's wrong. That's immoral. That's sinful or whatever. And so they shut it down and they don't listen to that calling. And you know what? That's okay because we make our way through lives. We go through university. We do our 9 to 5. We have our family. But that calling is still there. It never really goes away. And that's one of the important things to know is that if something is pulling you, has that tendency to pull you, it will never force you into it. You always have free will to say, nope, not for me, not at this time. And it will always sit there and go, okay, not a problem. When you're ready, I'm here though. And so when that time comes, when you're finally stable, when you're finally solid, and you're able to tune back in, you feel that calling again, just know that it's still there. There's still something there waiting to go, great, cool. If you're ready to listen, I'm here to teach you. And so it's never really gone, and it will never force you or make you uncomfortable or push you into doing something you never want to do. It's just kind of a whisper inviting you if you're ready and willing to go.
yeah, that's super. And now, have you ever done any hallucinogenic stuff, Kaedrich?
Believe it or not, I haven't. The most I've
Okay,
ever done is cannabis. I've always been
okay,
kind of a control freak on consciousness, and I'm a lightweight. I mean, this kind of sucks to admit it, but you put 2 or 3 drinks in me, and I'm a big guy, right? When I was 260 pounds, I was 19% body fat. So I'm a big guy. I'm always going to be a big guy. But 2 drinks, 3 drinks at the most, and you can put me down. So I can't do too many of the mind altering things. And I can vividly hallucinate on 10 milligrams of cannabis. So I never really had that opportunity to go into other sort of entheogens or other plant medicines just because of the susceptibility of my mind.
Yeah, I've spoke to people, not necessarily, the way that you that your mind works, but people, have these, whether it's ayahuasca they've done, or some DMT, or acid, and they come up with, they tell you stories about being on a trip, and it sounds very much like, because it's mostly because you've just said you're a very big guy, but you're very soft spoken, and have this like unbelievable outlook on life, and it just feels like the kind of thing that somebody would have to take some substance to get to that place. But you've obviously found this place, almost sober.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that this topic keeps coming up, but in a very interesting way. Because even though I have not really partaken in the entheogens too deeply, but I've got a friend who's inviting me to explore some mushrooms, which is cool. I'm curious about psilocybin. My own guides, I call them whispers, and this is where I can get a little wacky woo-woo. My own, they're spirit teachers for me, sat me down one day and gave me a 5-step protocol to help people who want to experience the essence of plant medicines without having to take them. But this protocol only works for people who have had positive experiences with DMT, with ayahuasca, with psilocybin, or some sort of plant medicine. If they've had a positive experience with it, they know what that state feels like, and I can guide them through this 5-step process of reconnecting with that sacred essence so that they can go in with the right set and setting with a proper intention, have the experience that they want to have, but be completely endogenously created having this experience so that it's now under their terms, under their role. And when they're done, they can be done with it and go back to living their normal life without having to wait for, the plant medicines or the chemicals to wear off, without having to go double platinum in the bathroom while they're waiting for everything to kick out.
Yeah.
So I'm really like, I sit there and I go, why? Wait a minute. I haven't done these things. Why are you teaching me? Why are you provoking me to have people learn this experience? And they're like, you'll see, just try it. So I'm putting together a little test group soon to see how this works out. I told you to do test groups. I've got one putting together, and we'll see. I'm skeptical, but we'll see.
It could be interesting.
Definitely,
Could be interesting.
definitely.
We'll stay tuned for some updates on that, I believe.
So
yeah,
do you
so-
think then? Sorry, Chris. Do you think, Kaedrich, then that your kind of training and your experience has allowed you to get into those states that people have then kind of, for want of a better phrase, hitchhiked into by using psilocybin and DMT, whereas you kind of travel there freely then through your training?
Absolutely. One of my favorite tools that I use is a black mirror. And when I open up a black mirror, it becomes like a portal to another reality, to a different type of dimension. And when I get really working into the black mirror, I do lose sense of connection with this physical world, with the Newtonian, Einsteinian physics that we have in our reality. I lose that sensibility. The shape and the size of the mirror distorts in dimensionality, and the communication that comes through with beings is not audible, but it's very clear in the mind. It's like telepathic, and it has been like full on visual. Like I've been a little bit startled because there is something in the room and I can clearly see that it's there. It's not human. It doesn't have a human shape. It's very numinous. And some of the things that people have described, especially when they're on 5-MeO DMT, connecting with interdimensional beings and beings in other realities, I'm like, yes, I've had that exact same experience that they describe in a black mirror setting, completely full on visual, not audible, but telepathic communication that I can clearly remember. And it's like, so the colors, by the way, the colors are amazing. Working with a black mirror, I cannot tell you if they're green or blue, yellow, but the colors are vivid and they're nothing I've ever seen in any other place before. But just bright and vivid colors.
It almost makes you want to go there and see these colours. It just makes you like. I've heard this, before. I've never taken any hallucinogenics at all. But that's the thing you've heard. The colours are so vivid and bright, and it does, make you kind of go. I would like to see what these colours look like because it sounds fantastic. But yeah, that's yeah. So, how do you? Can you put any like shape or name on the beings that you see? Is that something that what like how could you describe it?
Sure. One of my favorite ones that I work with, I have no other way to describe them other than saying that they're causal beings or causal entities. When the way that they've helped me understand their reality that they exist in is, to us, time looks like it's linear. It goes from one point to the next point. It's a straight line. Cause always follows effect. To them, time exists all at once. It's everywhere. But what they experience is multiple layers of possibility and probability. And they're fascinated because our observation of a moment collapses that possibility into actuality. So to them, they live in these multiple layers of possibility where we live in a single layer of actuality. And to them, a moment is an actual living being. Like for us, like we would see, I don't know, a jellyfish, for example. To them, a moment is like a jellyfish, that it lives for that time frame that we would experience, and it gives birth to the next moment, which gives birth to the next moment. And so see these moments as actual living beings with a purpose and a function that they fulfill, and they procreate. And I'm like, their concepts and what they've told me about time has just blown my mind. And so I call them causal beings because I have no other way of experiencing it. Like they experience time the way we experience space and vice versa. It's really weird.
Okay. Yeah. That's kind of mind blowing. Like when you're sitting, when you're just kind of I'm sitting here going, okay, and then what happens? And then what happens? Like, and then what happens? Do you know what I mean? It's just like, whoa. Yeah, that's super interesting. The one thing that I find fascinating is the sort of space that human beings live in. So we live in this reality, but like when you think about dreams, like I had a weird dream last night, and then you start to go, what is that? What is a dream? What's happening when? Because this thing was happening in real time, like I was living it there, and then you wake up and go, what the fuck? I'm in bed. What? Yeah, but it's a weird thing. Like, what's the mind is such a powerful thing that I don't think we can. Or maybe you can understand your own mind, but I don't know what's going on in my crazy head. But yeah, it's just so fascinating when you speak to, because I think we speak to people. And I don't like to use the word normal, but we speak to normal people all day. Like I speak to somebody in the store and they say, how's your mum getting on? How's your gran? Is she fine? How's work? But they're just people who go home, watch soap operas on TV, go to bed, and get up and do the same thing again. And then you speak to people like you, who just completely make you question reality. It's like I feel like I have to go and ask myself some questions now tonight. I'm already questioning life. It's so interesting. So I know we don't have a huge amount of time, so I'm going to have to jump around a little bit here, Kaedrich. So in the ghost hunting stuff, what? So you're teaching people how to? Did you say protect themselves when they're ghost hunting?
Exactly.
Okay. So how do you protect yourself when you're ghost hunting?
The main principle that I work with for any sort of the paranormal problems is the principle that similarities attract and perpetuate. Meaning, whatever frame of mind that you're in, whatever emotional state you're in, is what you'll draw to you. So, if you go into a location that's haunted, and you believe that it's fully haunted and that there are some sort of entities there, you are already primed and open to the fact that you're going to encounter something because your mind is now set. The whole set and setting, you're set that there's something there. But if you fully believe that it's malevolent and that it's harmful and that you're in danger, you're going to be opening yourself up to that. You're going to be transmitting this fear energy, this vulnerability energy, because every emotion has an energy. And for our skeptics out there, and I love it, the work of Hameroff and Penrose has actually shown us that the microtubules of the neurons throughout all of our body, all the nerve cells, actually have virtual energy that is tuned by our thoughts and our emotions. So even the energy that we are outputting is created by our emotional state and our thoughtful state. Now imagine that there are beings out there, entities, that they're not evil. It's just what they subsist on. So if you have a fear-based entity, it's going to come around to you, poke you with some fear energy. So now you're going, what was that? What was that? You're generating fear as an energy that it can feed off of, and it goes, oh, finally. So it's eating off of you. So what happens is I teach people that if you're going into these places, knowing that there could be some sort of fear-eating type entity, I first teach them how to discern what are their thoughts and emotions versus what might be externally derived, so that when they encounter that externally derived, they have a few things they can do. The first thing I tell anybody to do, if you are feeling that something is trying to provoke you with fear, with anger, with that creepy, oh my God, what is this feeling, is to actually laugh at it. Believe it or not, laughing will create this type of energy that repels a fear-based being or an anger-based being or any sort of negative entity. You're going to laugh at it. It's going to be like, what are you doing to me? The next stage that you can do is, let's say you're in a haunted place, you're in a haunted location, you're feeling that fear creeping up on you. You're feeling that cold spot of something draining your energy. Cold spots are very real. There's something pulling energy away from you. So you're feeling that coldness, and maybe you see a shadow move or some sort of a dark form. Our first response as a human being is to go, ah, and run, which is what you see on the TV shows, right? Or to freak out. The thing I'm training ghost hunters to do and paranormal investigators to do is to feel that feeling of fear, be aware of it, look at that shadow entity in the room, that dark entity, and then go, whoa, you're real? That's amazing. How cool is that? Because if you have that sense of awe and wonder in that moment, you are tapping into the reality that there is something there, but you are not buying into that fear provocation that it could be trying to use to attack you and draw energy off of you. Your sense of awe and wonder actually becomes like a shield, like a protective barrier, so that you can acknowledge the paranormal experience happening, but you are not being affected by it in a negative way. And so this awe and wonder is just an amazing tool for anybody, not just paranormal investigators, but anybody to have. Like if you're at home late at night watching TV and suddenly something moves on the other side of the room and you're feeling like, oh, what is this? You can go, whoa, you just knocked that book off the table? I dare you to go do another book. Knock that off. And so if it's something trying to mess with you and you're sitting there with a sense of awe and wonder going, wow, that's great, it can't mess with you anymore. But if it is something more positive, like, like a playful child or something, it might get off on that and go, okay, cool, let's knock another one off. And then you know that you're actually in the presence of something that's not harmful, but that you can actually peacefully and happily coexist with.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I was just going to say that because... Sorry, Alex. No, I was going to say, when we were kids, my gran and granddad had actually just round the corner from where I stay now, in a big old house. And that house was 100% haunted, 100%. And you're talking about cold spots there, but I can remember being a kid and being in a room and there was a noticeable drop in the temperature, and then you were aware that something, and I think people have said before that kids are a little bit more aware to this stuff than maybe adults. But yeah, you would be aware that something had changed in the room, like there was something was there, 100%. But my gran was, she's one of those people where her bedding would be perfectly flat, and then when she would been in the house on her own, or I was in the house with her, whatever, she would go back upstairs within half an hour of making a bed, and somebody had sat on the bed. That somebody had sat on the bed. It was a perfect, like somebody had sat on it. But my gran used to shout at the ghost. She used to shout, say, "Bloody sick of you doing that!" But there was never nothing bad ever happened. It's interesting now that you say that. You go, oh, that's quite, she just, as this, crazy old Scottish woman would do, shouted at the ghost.
Yeah, I was going to say very, very similar, because as Chris knows, I grew up in Brodick Castle, a castle over on the Isle of Arran. I'm not rich by any stretch of the imagination. My grandparents were the custodians for the National Trust, the charity that owns the castle. So they lived in the staff flats at the top, and like all castles, it was haunted by a ghost called the Grey Lady. And similar to Chris, I used to remember seeing her, and again on the peripheries, on the outside edge of your vision. And again, my grandpa used to laugh about it when he used to do his night watch duties. I used to go with him. And it used to be really cool because you would go through the old banqueting hall, and they had, it's quite famous, but along one of the walls, there's like 400 heads of stags that have been shot. So you got all the eyes on the wall, and they kind of follow you. And then something would rattle, and my grandpa would be like, away you go, you silly old bism. To the Grey Lady, because she was causing mischief, and he used to kind of dismiss it. And when I was little, you would be a little bit scared because you're like, oh, ghost, you've seen the stories, you've heard read the books. And then you realise, as my grandpa used to, oh, just ignore her, she'll go away. She's trying to get to you. Just ignore her or tell her to go away, and you'll be fine. There'll be no harm will come to you. So it's interesting that, as Chris has said, his gran used to do it, and then, you yourself there, Kaedrich, are saying that's actually a defence, whether learned or by happenstance or by practice or exposure, that maybe we start to lose in the modern world.
Yep, you're exactly right, because that's another thing I teach in the defense classes, is how to set those boundaries, like saying, don't mess with me, we're not here, but you can peacefully coexist here. Just like what you were describing. It's like, you're just messing with me again, that's fine, that's your thing, go and do it. So I love it that you have those examples of healthy ways of dealing with the paranormal. It's just like, it's here, it's normal, but just come on, cut it out. Stop messing with me.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember being on holiday once with a friend when we were younger. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and there was something standing over my friend's bed. Now, I'd woken up, some people may say you're dreaming or whatever. But when you wake up and you look and you go, something's standing over my friend's bed. And then as I stared, it slowly walked back into the curtains and then just disappeared. But I sat there for ages staring, just going, is this real? And I would say 100% there was something there, like 100%. So yeah, there's a couple of instances, that I've had where you go, something's, and if this might be a very childish way to look at it, but if you think about all the people on Earth right now, like 7.5 billion, 8 billion, if you think about all the people that have ever lived through all of history, you think, well, where does everybody go? Like, there has to be some, if as we're saying, if everybody's energy, then where does the energy go? There has to be something that happens. Like, it would make sense in some capacity.
Exactly. It's not childish at all. That makes absolute sense. Sometimes parts of it linger in these places, like you were describing. Sometimes there are other entities here, because there's more than 7.5 to 8 billion sapient creatures on this planet. There's a lot of energetic ones that don't have bodies, the spirits, but there's a vast, for want of a better word, spirit world, afterlife, that is filled with billions of people. I am a believer in reincarnation in a different way. And sometimes souls don't quite always make it through. It's like when we try to reach out to a loved one that we just can't seem to connect with on the other side. Sometimes they didn't quite make it through, or maybe they're going through another transition process. There's a lot of variables on there, believe it or not. It gets pretty complex when we get into some of the details of what's on the other side. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There is a place for all of that to go, and some of
Yeah,
it's still here.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of the things. I don't know. I don't know if Ali has ever been to the. Have you been to the Edinburgh Dungeons, Ali?
And the actual like attraction.
Yeah,
No, I've not been to the
yeah.
Edinburgh one. I've
Neither
been
have
to
I.
others. I've
So
been to Mary King's Close, but not to
okay,
the dungeons.
in Scotland, in Edinburgh, it's the Edinburgh Dungeon Walks is something that's really popular with tourists and and locals, and it's something I've read a lot of stories of a lot of weird things happening,
Yeah.
where
Eh,
there's parts where plague victims were buried and all sorts of things, and I just refuse to go. I don't want to mess with something that
Well,
I don't understand.
yeah, I went to Mary King's Close, which is the old just Kaedrich. It's the old tenements, the old closes that used to exist in Edinburgh's old town, and over the decades and centuries they built on top of it. So it's where the Royal Mile is now. There's about 4 or 5 layers underneath it. That's just the old streets. And for parts of it were blocked up. They put all the poor down there that were plague victims and just basically essentially quarantined them until they died off. And there's a very famous room which is known as the corn doll room, and there's a little corn doll that a girl wove back in the 1600s, and it sits on a little alcove in the wall, and the girl reputedly died in that room.
Mhm.
And as you go down there, obviously the host that's taking you down there obviously builds it up over time and builds up, and it's very atmospheric because you're in 16th century tunnels, 5 foot tall. I mean, I'm 6'3". I'm kind of hunched down, walking through, and the guy's talking and setting the thing up. And he did say there's a point where he says, this room that we're going into is the most famous on the whole walk. It's where the corn doll room is. People that are sensitive to spirits always get a really strong feeling as they step through the threshold, and really kind of built it up. And then he said, the group I was with, and he said, and if you want, you can now go in and explore the room and see what you feel. And there was a person on the tour who was partially sighted, and they had a guide dog with them, like an assistance dog. And the person went, walk on, and the dog just sat down. And at that point, even I was like, whoa, like that tingle that goes up the back and across the scalp, because I'm thinking that's a highly trained assistance dog. And his owner said, walk on. And the dog's going, nope, dumb, and just sat and refused to cross the threshold into that room. And I swear, not one of us went in, because, guys, is anyone going to be? We're like, nah, no, no.
Yeah.
If Scooby Doo's not going in there, we're not going in either. Like, we are, we're tapping out at this point. We are not stepping over that threshold. And no one went into the room, all because that dog.
That's interesting.
And you imagine, that dog, they talk about animals being sensitive to earthquakes and, so much other things. It was just the fact that it was a trained assistance dog, and it literally was stood on all fours. And as soon as the owner said, walk on, it just sat down and looked at them as if to say, are you fucking kidding me? There's no way I'm going in that room. And genuinely, the chill that went up my spine and across my skin, even retelling it, I get a little bit of a tingle. But
Yeah.
there's definitely something in that room. If you ever get a chance to go in it, there's definitely something in that room.
Oh, I definitely will. I've been on the Royal Mile once back in 1990, but I didn't realize you could go under the Royal Mile. So that is now on my list of things to do. Absolutely, I want to see that place. I definitely want to go to the Corn Doll Room. I would love that experience. And what you were describing, that tingle that comes up your back and goes up to the top of your head, I call that the Goosebump Rush. And when I'm teaching seances or any sort of investigation, I tell people to trust the Goosebump Rush. Like, if you get what seems to be a message and you want to say it, and just as you're about ready to say it, you get that Goosebump Rush, that's when you blurt it out, because that is your intuition kicking in. That's the deepest part of your visceral nervous system, firing all of those neurons going, I have information here. This is real. Feel it. This is me. And so when you got that goosebump rush when the dog sat down, that was your intuition kicking in, going, yep, there's something in here. I need to pay attention to this. Absolutely. That's awesome. I'm going there.
Yeah, is this? Do you think this is something that people have lost over the years, centuries, to not trust this thing? If you can't see it, it's not real, kind of thing.
I don't think it's lost over the years and centuries. I think it's lost over the lifetimes. When we're kids, we have it. I think it's a natural ability for everybody. But when we tell our parents, because our parents were grown up this way, we tell our parents about it. They're like, oh, stop making up stories. You're just playing with an imaginary friend. Oh, I don't want to hear any more of this kind of nonsense. Or they're genuinely afraid. And so kids get shut down for it. They want to belong. They want to fit in with their parents. They don't want to get in trouble. So we just tune it out. We turn it off. This goes back to what I talk about the veil. In these circles, we hear about people saying, like at midnight, the veil between worlds is thinnest, or at 3 a.m., the veil between worlds is thinnest. In this cemetery, the veil is thinnest. In that location, in the dungeon, the veil is. And I'm like, no, 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 no. There is no veil. There never was a veil. Ever was. Never been a veil. What we use as a metaphor of the veil is allowing our mind to tune in or out for what's already around us. So if you go in believing that a place is haunted and that you're going to have a haunted experience, you're tuning in your mind. You've crossed the veil already. When we do seance and we set and setting, we set sacred space around us, we call in the beings, we're not dropping the veil. We're tuning our minds to be open to receive. And so when you went down into the corn room, almost ready to go to the corn doll room, and you felt that goosebump rush, it wasn't that you were crossing a veil. Your mind was opening to the possibility and becoming aware. And that's what we lost as kids. We had that as kids. But over the years, when we get older, we're starting to recover it. More and more people are watching the paranormal shows, tuning into shows like this, realizing that the paranormal is perfectly normal, the supernatural is completely natural, and our ability to perceive and interact with it is a natural talent we all have. We just need to reclaim it, own it, and go, yep, this is real, and this is all around me, has been all the time.
Yeah, yeah. Like I say, it's certainly an interesting topic. I can remember, as I was saying earlier, if you look at something I thought of when I was younger, just looking at, it must have been a cemetery that was close. There's quite a lot of old graves, and it was just looking at it, and like I was saying, you're looking at it going, all these people. This is one little graveyard in one little part of Scotland. You think, these people were at that time, certainly in this part of the world, were all buried. Nobody was cremated at that point. And you just think, well, where does there's a lot of dead bodies. There's a lot of skeletons, and if if you believe in a soul, or like I say, energy. I'm a believer in energy. That must go someplace. I thought that when I was younger, and I still think that now. To me, if you want to believe, the Big Bang was real, to go way back. If you want to know the Big Bang was real and it was energy, then everything that came after that has to be energy, because that's what there was. So human beings would always have. You do get. It's interesting. Just talking about this. There's a tree. Now, this sounds crazy, and I've said this to people before, and they look at me like I'm crazy. There's a tree that I run past most Saturdays when I go for a little run in the hills, the Lomond Hills near us. And I think I've posted a picture on Facebook and Instagram before. And there's something about this tree that just freaks me out. There's something about it that it just doesn't add up to me. And I don't know what it is. Every time I come past it, especially when it gets to nighttime, if it's going dark, because quite often I'll go out for a sunset run, watch the sunset, and then I have to run past it again, and a bit of nice little pace. And then once I get near this tree, I just pick the pace up ever so slightly, because there's something about this tree that gives me a bad vibe, and I just don't know what it is. And to most people, they would think, shut the fuck up, you idiot, it's a tree. But there's something about it that just makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, and I don't know why. It's strange.
So here's what I'd invite you to do: is the next time you go past that tree, stop let yourself tune into that creepy feeling that you get, that unnerving feeling, just for a little bit, to tap into it, to be open to that feeling coming on, and then be aware of any sort of visual impressions. You might not actually see it, but like if you were to imagine holding a lemon right now, you can imagine what it looks like, the peel of it, the texture of it, the waxy feel of the lemon, the color, even though you're not really seeing it. The same kind of thing when you're tuning into that feeling with a tree. If you get a visual impression, like a color or a texture, just be aware of that one. Or if you get the idea of a word or any emotion that comes up, like a secondary or third emotion that comes with it, just to be aware. And then when you get that impression, those feelings, or any sort of information, just acknowledge it. Say, cool, I get it, I understand, thank you. And actually have a moment of gratitude for the extra information that you got built off of that feeling, and then go for your run. And don't think about it anymore. Just kind of let that be a tune in, because it might give you some impression on why that tree is giving you the creep out feeling, and it could lead you to the next steps of what you need to do about it.
Interesting. I may try that. I'll have to work up to it. I'll have to talk myself to it and be brave. But yeah, it makes sense. But yeah, so I know, I know we're moving along with time here. So I want to ask you about your time in Scotland, your little hitchhiking adventure in Scotland, because it sounds cool.
Well, that's one thing I do want to mention real quick, because I did spend quite a bit of time, a couple of weeks in the Highlands. And what you were describing with the tree and what you guys were talking about, the castles and locations, absolutely. I mean, on the Isle of Skye, staying at a hostel and then just kind of walking through the forest. Oh, yeah, those woods have something in there. Putting my hand into a stream, just, felt this weird impression to put my hand into the stream. And I felt another hand, a cold hand, go around my hand. I didn't feel like it was going to pull me in or anything, but it was more just like an acknowledgement. Walking through a cemetery in the Highlands, man. Some of the back part of the cemetery where all the graves are sunken in, and it's just like really the ground feels spongy. Like, oh my God, I don't want to be walking here in case I fall in, because it just felt weird. The entities and the spirits and the ghosts in those places are just massively full. So yeah, I can verify from personal experience, Scotland's massively haunted everywhere.
Yeah, Skye. Funnily enough, I was watching. There's I think it was on the adventure show. There's a little show on a Sunday morning, breakfast time, and there was I cannot remember the name of the bloody island, but there's a loch and there's a little island in the middle, and there's a grave of a Viking, and I can't remember who. I think he was, some kind of, whatever it would be, nobility, and his wife was buried there because they were in Scotland, and they buried them on this little island, and it was one of those things where you can swim over. I was like, fuck, I need to swim over and check that. It just seems cool. There's these Viking graves on these tiny little islands in Scotland seems super cool. So I'll have to remember the name of that and go check it out. But yeah, you're talking about Skye. The Isle of Skye is staggering. Absolutely, I try to get up once a year to climb some hills. It's just a unbelievably cool place. So yeah, and I need to check out. Now there is quite a lot of Ali, you'll know this better than me probably. There is quite a lot of Viking ruins on these islands, isn't there?
There's certainly a lot of pagan and Neolithic and Norse. Like where I'm from in Arran, on Macquarie Moor, there's a Neolithic or maybe even Paleolithic standing stone circle. It's out in the middle of nowhere. The sign says it's a mile. If it's a mile, I'm 5'2" and 19 stone. You know what I mean? It's definitely not a mile, but it's a gorgeous setting. And there is, again, I went there the last time I went there, I was probably maybe 10 or 11, and hanging up on a fence near the standing stones, I found a grass hand-woven pentagram that my grandparents let me pick up, and they're like, yeah, you can take that, because they told me it was a symbol of protection. I don't know if that's true or not, but it was a hand-woven, like made out of the grass from within the standing circle pentagram, and I had it above my bed until I was probably about 18 years old when I moved out my parents' house, and then it just disappeared over the years. But I had it for 6 or 7 years, this dried grass pentagram that came from within Macquarie Moor Standing Stones.
That's amazing.
That'd be cool to have.
You're right about the runes. It's not Uist, but one of the isles around Uist. I remember hearing of an old burial mound that has since been cleared out, but all of the markings on the inside of the wall are runes written by the Norse people that came through here, and they don't say anything more profound than Sven was here. That was basically all it is. It's just graffiti. Just people who came and probably took one of the grave goods and then carved some runes on the wall and just left it as their marker that they were here to snag something out of the grave mound.
Yeah, it's there's still the thing is, I love the Isle of Skye. I don't have enough time to go to, I'd love to go visit all the islands and explore, do some running and swimming in lochs and some of the little pools. I just haven't had time yet. I will. If anything, the last year told me that take more opportunity to do these cool things that you want to, because the time, anything can happen at any point really. So I will definitely visit another couple of islands this year, because there's so many cool things to see. Well, I guess cool to some people, cool to us. To other people, they probably think it's just, oh, there's some stones, cool. I don't, you know what I mean? But there's so many cool things to see. So, one thing that I wanted to ask you, Kaedrich, was why is it, of all the sort of through all, of all the ages in history, if you think about any of the the periods we can think about, that people seem to be fascinated with Vikings, or Norse culture? Why? What is it about it, do you think, that makes people so interested?
There's a few different reasons for that one. There has been a couple of revivals of the Norse culture over the past years. There's the Wagnerian Society. Back in early 1900s, Wagner did the whole ring cycle. They really tapped into the old Norse culture back then and really got into the Viking stuff. Then there was the modern rebirth of Asatru, which is the old Norse paganism that we found in Iceland and in the US and other places back in the 70s, all about the same time. There's been these revivals. Ultimately, what I think it is the Norse culture through the Vikings. By the way, Viking was just like a part-time summer job. It wasn't actually a people. But during the time of the Vikings, sure, there was some raiding going on and some sort of conquering. But for the most part, a lot of the Norse culture was a subtle influence over a lot of the other major cultures. For example, the reason why the UK, from what I understand, was able to help unify into a solid kingdom was because the Saxons kept everybody else busy so that the other kingdoms could kind of unify. In Normandy, France, that was a Norse colony. They settled there. They turned all of France into a Thor cult for a short time. Then Charlemagne came in, and they just couldn't get rid of the Norse influence. Dublin is an old Viking town. There's just everywhere. The Norse have had some sort of a subtle influence that created governments. It created, really a lot of the countries that are out there. Even in Spain, we have the Visigoths and the Vandals that were a founding part of Spain. All the way out to Russia, there was a tribe of Swedes called the Rus who settled along the Volga River. And the Rus gave rise to Russia. And because we have this subtle undertones of Norse culture that have influenced so much of the world, I think every now and then it just kind of bubbles up and people go, ooh, what is this? And then we tend to romanticize it, and it gets romanticized in a very highly fictional way, which is like what we see on the Vikings TV show. I can't stand watching that just because it's just so outrageous. But I think people just romanticize that subtle influence.
Yeah, I have to say, I don't watch any television. I've never watched any. Ali would tell you this. I haven't watched any television series ever. I watched 5 minutes of something and went, nope, don't like it. the only thing I've ever watched from episode 1 to the very last episode was Vikings. I just loved it. I thought it was amazing. It's the only thing I've ever watched. Only thing. So thank you for ruining it for me. But it's something, everybody has these images, I guess people concentrate on like you're saying that the raiding part of it, where they have these images of the longboats and stuff, and that's the image that people have, but there's obviously a lot more surrounding the culture than just that. People think about Thorn and Odin and all, but there's obviously a lot of it misunderstood or just mistold, I guess. What we would be told. The same thing happens in Scotland, I guess. But people think about William Wallace and they think about Braveheart. And you go, that's not really what happened.
Lightning bolts out of his ass.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert: Braveheart is not a documentary.
Oh shit! Are you joking? I'm just thinking that I can't remember this. Who was the Andrew? Who was the William Wallace's right hand man, legitimate right hand man, who was actually the kind of the strategist? Andrew.
I was going to say Martin, but it's not. Fairley.
Something like that. Yeah, everybody talks about William Wallace, but they forget about the guy who kind of did all the strategy stuff. He was actually William Wallace is more kind of the spokesperson. Andrew, it's going to annoy me now. I can't remember.
Marv Levy did a poem about it. I'll find it.
So people think about William Wallace as being the great Scottish hero. But he actually had somebody else who was kind of as important, possibly more important, and they just forget about that part because one part of it has been romanticized. Like you're saying, the same with Norse culture and the Vikings. But yeah, it's something that I'm super interested in. I like the idea. I'm going to have to go and read. In fact, is there any books you would recommend to read?
For the Norse stuff, I always recommend the poetic and the prose Eddas. Those are the original books of the lore and the mythology written by the Norse. Granted, it was by Christian bishops that wrote them down, but it's still the oldest text that we have of that one. And I think that's a great place to start, and then you can get into some of the other more modern interpretations of it and descriptions of it, but I always recommend the Eddas.
Okay, cool. I'll remember that, and we'll have a look at that. That seems super, super interesting to read. So yeah, I think we should wrap up.
Yeah,
now.
we'll start with we could have definitely we could have spoke to you for hours. We'd love to, if you have the opportunity and time, we'd maybe look back in a few months and have you back on to do a bit more of a deep dive into this, Kaedrich, because it's been super interesting.
I love it. You guys are awesome. So
awesome.
Let's do that.
Awesome. Cool. If just before you do, just leave, we always get guests. So if you want to throw out any social media or internet places where people can find out more about you, your work, and we'll tag this in the show notes and tag it in the video and the release when we send this out as well.
Sure. When we're ever talking about books, I can't be negligent to not recommend my own, Runes for Transformation, where we talk about more of the practical ways of using runes. Then, of course, I have my website, kaedrich.com, where you can find my paranormal work, my work for pagan men, and the shadow work and all the kind of stuff that I do there in the Norse and the runes and the rune music that I create. And just look for my name on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and you'll find everything I do. And I'm always open for questions, comments, or thoughts, so don't hesitate to send me a message in any of those places. I love it.
Awesome. Well, we know that time is precious, and you've got a meeting to get to, Kaedrich. So I just want to say again, thank you, one, for jumping in, two, for having such an awesome, interesting episode. And as I say, we'd definitely love to do it again and get another probably hour and a half chat with you, no issues whatsoever. We could listen to you talk all day. But I think with that, let's call episode 61 of the Silly Goose Gang podcast with Kaedrich Olsen done and dusted. Thank you very much, Kaedrich.
Thank you, man. You guys are awesome.
The Silly Goose Gang podcast.